All right, so even though I'm on vacation, there have been some big moves in the transfer portal, or at least two cornerbacks that I think we need to talk about that when they made their decisions, I think that it's going to pay massive dividends. So before we hop into that, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes, N for no. Has your team successfully navigated the transfer portal? And if yes, let me know who your favorite addition to your team from the portal has been thus far. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions, though small, are massive to content creators such as myself and both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all of that being said, let's hop straight into this because we have got a bit to discuss. And I want to start in the SEC, where an Alabama Crimson Tide cornerback hit the portal in Marcus Banks. Now, for my Tide fans, you'll know Marcus Banks was an individual who was receiving really positive reviews during the springtime. And anytime he got an opportunity to play, he looked to make the most of it, recording 4 tackles this year and an interception. He's someone who has a high upside, standing at 6 foot, listed at 185 pounds per ESPN, and hailing from Houston, Texas. Now, whenever he hit the portal, there was some traction to Miami, especially when Miami hired Mario Cristobal. Mario Cristobal is an individual we know from keeping up with college football recruiting. He recruits at a very high level. Go look at his classes in Oregon, look at some of the dudes he signed, and he was signing some of the top defensive talent in the nation. And so whenever he goes to Miami, and Miami is a program that desperately wants to hit that status they had in the 2000s, early 2000s, where they were phenomenal. That's a fan base, that's a program that wants to get there, but hasn't had any success here recently. So whenever you see Mario Cristobal go to that program, and then you start seeing some chatter about, oh, Marcus Banks could end up there, you'd sit there and think to yourself, well, Cristobal is a great recruiter. He's been able to recruit defense very well, and Marcus Banks would be a huge addition to the Miami Hurricanes. Remember what I talked about not long ago when it pertained to Eli Ricks for Alabama. It's great. I love recruiting. That's my favorite thing in college football, and I think many of you know this. But if you have the opportunity to get a guy who's played Division I college football and who has a nice upside, that's really hard to pass up. So whenever you see that noise, it made absolute sense. However, in true college football fashion, a surprise happened. And Marcus Banks, instead of ending up at Miami with Mario Cristobal, is now at Mississippi State, staying in the SEC. Now, this is going to be a move I'm really interested in seeing. I'm very interested to see how Marcus Banks continues to progress because I believe he does have a high upside, and I wish nothing but the best for him, and he's a name I'm absolutely going to be keeping up with because I can't wait to see the matchups between he and the Alabama Crimson Tide and just how he does in general. He's someone who the coaches were high on. I think a lot of Alabama fans were interested to see what he would be able to do, especially when you watched him play in the brief stints he was able to. He was able to generate and pique some interest. So I think many Tide fans are going to be very interested to see how he does at Mississippi State. But speaking of a cornerback that can come in and help a team instantly, we've got to look to the Big 12 where the University of Texas made a splash in the transfer portal with Ryan Watts, a one-time teammate of Quinn Ewers, both individuals transferring from Ohio State and going back home to the state of Texas. Now, Ryan Watts is a really intriguing athlete, standing 6'2", 185 pounds, and that was when he was in high school, because those were his numbers per 24/7 Sports. So he's had a year in his college strength and conditioning program. So this is a very physical, very big individual, and he was productive for Ohio State. And that really circles back to what I was saying. Because we can sit here as fans and say, oh, well, these 4-star corners are fantastic to get. These 5-star corners are fantastic to get. And you're certainly not wrong for thinking that. No mistake there. Certainly not wrong for thinking that. But if you can get a guy that you know without a shadow of a doubt has translated from high school to Division I college football and has done so successfully, you just don't argue with those gets. You know, you have so much faith that that guy can come in and help you, that those are the type of players, especially if you're Texas and you're Steve Sarkisian and you have got to do something to help your season moving forward, that is a fantastic addition. Now, like I said, Ryan Watts is back home. He's from the state of Texas, so Steve Sarkisian and them were able to go into the transfer portal, not only get a big physical corner with really high upside who was productive for Ohio State, but also a former Texan, which, let's not make any mistake here. If he wasn't from Texas, it shouldn't have mattered at all whether Texas tried to get him. But it is a nice little cherry on top when you can get one of those kids who left the state to come back home. And if we look, Texas has been having some success here recently, especially with players that were once committed to or were at Ohio State. I mean, we're talking Quinn Ewers, who many probably weren't surprised when Quinn Ewers hit the transfer portal, especially when you look at the absurdity, the absolute absurdity of Ohio State's quarterback room. That room was absolutely insane. And so that room with so much depth, it made a lot of sense that Quinn Ewers would transfer, and going back home to Texas, where he'd always kind of been a fan of, made absolute sense. But then you double down with a Ryan Watts out the transfer portal from Ohio State, and then you go even further on National Signing Day, or early National Signing Day, and getting Terrence Brooks to flip from Ohio State to Texas. So if you are a Texas fan, and you're sitting here looking at this move, your secondary now has two names in it from this class or this period's transfer portal that you have got to be over the moon about. Terrence Brooks is an individual that was a high-ranked four-star. He's someone that I'm really interested to see what happens when he comes to college, how he develops. I was a big fan of his when he was out of high school. He's someone Alabama went after, ultimately chose Ohio State, and then Texas was able to flip him. The rest is history. But Ryan Watts with Terrence Brooks, if you're a Texas fan, you've got to be very, very pleased with what the Longhorns have been able to do, both in the portal and this year's recruiting class. Now, let's make no mistake. Texas has been able to get good recruiting classes before, and I've talked about this. It's not only about good recruiting classes. Your recruiting classes have to make sense. They have to gel with one another, and you have to be able to look at that recruiting class and say, you know what, I could build a football team from that. But also, development must happen. And this is where we're really going to be watching the Texas Longhorns. Is this staff going to be able to answer that problem that has plagued Texas for so long? That's why I'm ultimately really interested in hearing from y'all. These are two moves that I think are great, especially for Mississippi State, especially for Texas. Anytime you can get in a guy that you know translates in Division I college football, you don't argue with it and you grab him. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking about both of these moves, and then let me know, who's your favorite player your team has been able to get out the transfer portal? That's it. See ya.